You see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So keeping the water we get, how small changes can have big effects. So just roughly where we're going to be going, talking about kind of the big picture, solar energy, the water cycle, small water cycle, some more cycles, and then kind of how we can leverage those. Before second part is really going into the specific techniques. Really tried to keep it as interesting as possible with a lot of images and mostly focused on my work and research that I've done. So I guess my water story of who am I guess maybe is more important. Who am I not? I'm not an engineer. I'm not an academic. I came into the water space in this place. This is Wadi Rum in Jordan. I used to be, well, I still am a rock climber, guide. I used to do a lot of mountain rescue work. I was actually on a climbing trip out here in Wadi Rum that I got super fascinated by water. I was climbing with a number of local Bedouin guys, and it was really the 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 importance of water and them knowing where there was a puddle underneath a certain rock and realizing that the importance and really the value of water, for all life that really started me on this journey. So, um, to Wadi Rum in 2009. From then, I worked in with the Watershed Management Group in Tucson. I was very lucky to work with Brad Lancaster and Catlow, Shipbeck, and Lisa, all these people. I've got a lot of experience doing gray water installs, gray water reuse systems there, the Conserve to Enhance program. Um, I decided I wanted to do this professionally. I realized that I needed to get more education or at least more credentials. And so, talking to various professors, they're a little biased. There's like, well, if you're serious about water in the US, you should come to the U of A. But if you're interested in water globally, you should really go to Australia. So that's what I did. And I got my master's in integrated water management from the University of Queensland in Australia. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to go and do my final research project in Rajasthan, India. So, yeah, went to Rajasthan and studied traditional systems there, specifically around social equity between the newer centralized systems and their traditional systems. From there, came back to the US and worked for Watershed Progressive, where I did sort of a design build firm. We did a lot of gray water reuse, rainwater harvesting, sort of larger commercial integrated systems. Um, Including the big project I worked on was a new build hotel, Rush Creek Lodge, just outside of Yosemite, which we got some photographs from. And that's reusing roughly 3 million gallons annually back into the landscape. So I was involved with that project sort of from start to completion. And then from 2020, I've been operating my own small consulting firm and working on a number of different projects in both here in the United States. Did some work in Portugal, and have also been going down to Colombia for the last few years, working on a sort of bioregional scale reforestation project, which we'll talk about a bit more. So anyway, that's kind of me and where I'm from. So let's see if I can get rid of this. Oops. Oh dear. Did I kill the screen? What did I do?
No, no, we can see the planet, and it says if there's magic on this planet, it
I
is
just don't want to look at myself. That's all.
in water.
And now I can't see my screen. Okay, here we go. That's better. All right. If there's magic on this planet, it is contained in water, and the water cycle and the life cycle are one. So, a little Buckminster Fuller spaceship Earth here. This is our home. So, I believe everybody on this call, we call this place home, and this is what we got, right? So, we have a finite amount of water essentially, and it's cycling through this system. And really, we have an input being solar energy, right? So that's our driver for all these systems. But that's what's driving all these different cycles we're going to talk about. Um, yeah. So the water cycle and the life cycle are one. And also in Colombia, I love this sign. No hay vida sin agua. There's no life without water, and the kids there seem to get it very intuitively. Um, in reality, the world is composed of patterns of matter, energy, and life, and that functions as wholes whose quantities cannot be predicted by studying any aspect in isolation. So it's Alan Savory, and really getting at this idea that these systems are interconnected. So as Catherine was speaking about a little bit earlier, that this idea of carbon being this climate metric is a bit reductive in our thinking, and carbon is definitely a part of it, but it's just one piece, right? So yeah, these systems are really complex. So the system is dynamic, system is highly complex, and small changes can have large effects. So this is something that was brought up to me some years ago, and it's just sort of really been incredible in my work in thinking about what is possible, right? So thinking that things are very dynamic, they're complex, and that we can also shift these things in different ways. And a lot of the times we understand what we've done sort of in a negative, at the negative impacts, we can also reverse those to have uh, quite positive impacts. So in the big picture, here's Earth in the center at 287 Kelvin, and you have the sun, 5,800 Kelvin, in deep space at sort of 4 Kelvin. So we're in this state of flux, really, where we have being bombarded by this solar energy sitting in this sort of Goldilocks zone, right? So as I said before, this is really the driver for all these systems. So of that solar energy coming in, of that total energy reaching Earth, 173,000 terawatts, 122 roughly are absorbed by the Earth. And of that, you only have, 1 to 2% of that is driving the weather. And then you have 0.6% of that is captured by photosynthesis. And then even smaller percentages is what is be used by all the mammals. And I just really like the idea that there's just this tiny, tiny little bit of that solar energy that is what's driving human consciousness down at the bottom. So, so like I said, we've got cycles, and I like to sort of think about it that we have cycles within cycles. So a large water cycle. Now we know there's a smaller water cycles, a carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, and we call it a soil food web, but I really think of that as a cycle as well. So um, here's the large water cycle, which most people are familiar with. This is sort of what I was taught in you know middle school earth science, right, where we have that water coming off the ocean and it's precipitating in the clouds and falling back into land, and then it runs back out into the ocean. Um, but we also understand now that we have much smaller water cycles. So it's not just that one giant cycle happening, but we have multiple of these smaller cycles happening at different stages, and some of them, between the soil and the canopy, or within localized areas. But just thinking that it's not just as simple as one big cycle. Um, so again, we've got this driver of solar energy coming in that is, and we have transpiration. So that's really the process of photosynthesis and evaporation there. And here we are, photosynthesis. So we have water, it's carbon dioxide, sunlight, that's that solar energy, and then we're getting the glucose and oxygen out of it. So thinking that this is one of the major cycles that we have driving these systems. We also have the carbon cycle, where again, you have photosynthesis on the left and, animal respiration, organic carbon, all these sorts of things. Um, the nitrogen cycle. So not to go into too much detail here, but noticing that you have nitrification. So that's really bacteria that's doing that. You have the nitrogen fixing that's done by bacteria on roots. Um, so then going down to what we call the soil food web commonly, and I also see this as a cycle, right? So this is what's going on in the soil. Um, so without, you know, taking a huge amount of time on this. I think the main point or the main takeaway here is that this is a very, very complex system for all these things to be interacting with. And we can't just pull out one part of it, like carbon, and say that's the thing, right? Like they all impact each other, right? So, um, so talking about climate and rainfall, here we have a map of global precipitation. So we're looking at average precipitation, and thinking, well, okay, so some places it rains more than other places, but why does that happen? Well, we have a biotic pump that's sort of helping in this system. We know we used to think that they were forests places because it rained a lot, and now we realize that it rains a lot because there are forests, right? So um, the idea of the biotic pump, we now know that uh, when water falls or when rain falls on the land, a lot of that recycles. So 40% of precipitation recycles globally, and 50% of evapotranspiration recycles globally. So on the left, the top left, you're looking at the continental precipitation ratio, and you can see how much of that roughly is being cycled inland, right? And then the evaporation recycling ratio below that. So, I mean, more specifically, 50 to 60% of the evapotranspiration from the US coastal states is recycled inland. So Alpha Low, he talks about this as hopping water, right? That you need to have these systems in place, otherwise the rainfall farther inland isn't going to happen, right? So being a Californian here and very aware of the amount of pavement and what we've done to environment out here, the impacts are not just California, but that's impacting these weather patterns farther inland, right? So 60, 80% of evapotranspiration in Europe, Middle East, and Northeast Asia is recycled. And this image down below, I quite like that. So I took that in San Diego, where I was managing a ranch down there. And what we're seeing there, that's not coastal fog coming in, but that's actually, transpiration from the plants first thing in the morning. So um, in the Central Valley here, we call that tule fog. And we've had that decrease by 30% in the last 15 years is a number that I've heard. And that's something that I've sort of tracks with me and something that I've noticed over my life. So here's another image that kind of summarizes it from Brad Lancaster. And this is getting at sort of both the problem and the potential solutions in it. So when we have these bare compacted soils, we're really rejecting that rainfall. We're increasing our flooding, increasing the droughts. But when we have vegetation, a good amount of soil organic matter, we're really infiltrating that rainfall, cycling it, holding it. So we're multiplying less flooding and less drought. And there's an elephant in the room, and that not so many people are talking about. And hopefully all y'all on this call are sort of picking up on what that might be. But so water begets water, and soil is the womb, and that's from Milan, the late climate physicist. And Rob Lewis, I think, summarized it far better than I can. So I'm just going to read you a full quote from Rob Lewis. Soil is the womb because it holds the water, but here again, it's really life holding the water, the rich below ground microbiological community, which makes the difference between the compacted water repellent dirt and clumpy absorptive soil. When it's all working together, a very fortuitous feedback loop appears. The more carbon in the soil, the more water the soil can hold. The more water in the soil, the more life it can grow. According to the USDA, the top 6 inches of soil hold 20 to 27,000 gallons more water per acre than 1% increase in soil organic carbon. A virtuous cycle begetting water, sequestering carbon and water, unseen and underground, womb-like. Vegetation is the midwife because it delivers the water to the atmosphere as vapor, where it rises, condenses, and falls again as rain. But vegetation doesn't only send up water vapor, It also delivers the seeds of future raindrops in the form of condensation nuclei. These are microscopic grains of various biota, such as bacteria, fungal spores, and release vapors, all of have all of which have uniquely low freeze thresholds, hastening the vapor's condensation from vapor to ice and its subsequent return to land as rain. The vegetation is sending up the water, it's also bringing it back down in another virtuous cycle, self-amplifying. So that was Rob Lewis, and I thought he put it far better than I could, so wanted to read that too. Um, so that's just this idea that if we understand the complexity of all these cycles, and in a lot of ways, I started with what we've done wrong and how we've altered these cycles in a very negative way. We can start changing them, and these small changes can have these huge effects. So something like digging a rain garden, you're going to be you're going to be getting all these sorts of benefits out of that. One-time expenditure of energy, where you're going in and digging that ditch essentially, so that when it does rain, you're getting more water being held, infiltrated into the ground. You're having a huge number of benefits that will come from that, far, far greater than that initial um, input of energy. So I like thinking about that as sort of cosmic judo, getting to leverage that solar energy. Uh, but yeah, I was thinking now we just take a break if anyone has any questions, and then the next section will go more into sort of the actual techniques and how we can actually be working on the land. So, Bueller?
Were you actually biking in this scene here?
Yeah, that's my bike. That's my bike. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
gorgeous.
Uh, okay. We
And
can,
JP is asking where this photo was taken.
this is in Nepal, on the Annapurna circuit. I rode my bike around Mount Annapurna a couple years ago. That's where that is. Anything else? Questions?
I have a
Keep
question.
going. Yeah.
Am I, this is great, Charles. The uh, the data point of 40% of the precipitation is recycled. Was that the term you
Yeah.
uh, is that when you is that the amount of water that goes back up into the atmosphere, and the other water, the other 60% goes into
Yeah,
the
that's yeah,
river?
yeah, exactly. That's my understanding. So that of that sort of taking precipitation, that 40% of that is actually going to be recycled back inland, whereas that other 60% is, kind of as we think of it, going out to the ocean. It would be
Just
going.
to explain the process in a simple way, but that's
Yeah,
but
I mean, it's quite hard for me to wrap my head around. But this is I got that all from some of Alpha's writing. Um, but then the other number being evapotranspiration. So that was 57%, right? So that you know, over half of the water that's transpired then falls again on the land as precipitation. Is that helpful, Carl?
yes.
Well, I have a question related to that then. So, um, is that kind of the quote unquote normal standard, or like kind of, where we are now certainly is not the normal standard. Like more of the water is running into the ocean faster, like and more immediately, and less is cycling in the small water cycle. So are there numbers on what it quote unquote should be and where we are now? You know what I mean?
Mm, good
Yeah, no,
question.
that's a great question. Yeah, I would have to ask Alpha on that one. I mean, so Milan, he unfortunately passed away quite recently, but a lot of this research and this understanding, Mikhail Kravchuk and with the small water cycle is very recent. So I don't know that we have
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
exact numbers on what it was previously. We have much better numbers on what it's doing now. I'm sure we have models and that sort of thing, but no, I can't give you a much better answer than that.
Yeah. Well, that study that I was recently looking at a little bit more closely, where they mapped out how much soil moisture has been lost. They used satellite images, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and they've determined that we've lost half. I forget the number right now. It's hard to is it half? But they've determined that we've lost a significant amount of soil moisture from this study that they did, and I can find the link and put it in the chat.
That'd
And
be
then
great.
That would be
from
great, great.
okay, but from that, even it supposedly it surprised the researchers, but then from that they determined that is more of a cause, that is twice the cause of sea level rise than glacier melt. I couldn't even wrap my head around. I was like, that was shocking. I think most of us do not perceive sea level rise that way for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, I'd be very interested to read more about that. Yeah.
I'll put the link in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, super. Anybody else? Go on. All right, keep it moving.
I
So
can
this
I
is
can say a thing or two about the article that um, Louise was referring to, if you want me to.
Yes.
yeah, please, Art.
Um, I might be able to concentrate better if we could unshare the screen. Thanks. Don't mean to be a pain. So the lead author is an article published in Science. It was originally published in some journal of hydrology. SEO is the lead author, and then it was picked up by the Washington Post, and one of the most memorable things about it was that they said, well, this loss of soil moisture could be irreversible. And I say, anybody who knows anything about soil knows that that's anything but irreversible. But the authors found that from the year 2000 to 2002, there was something on the order of 1,500 gigatons of water lost. And that's just by any standards, that's just huge. Soil moisture lost.
I'm sorry, 200.
1,500 gigatons between the years 2000 and 2002. And what else was I going to say about that? That was a higher. That's not that time period. That 2 or 3 year time period is not typical. Like there's been a comparable amount for some reason. There's been a comparable amount lost between 2002 and 2015. So for whatever reason, less per year. I'm always looking at things from the standpoint of influence and persuasion and rhetoric, and I think the most significant thing from that standpoint is that here, for one thing, here are mainstream scientists who are admitting the monumental amount of soil moisture that was lost. That's one thing. And they're probably not going to continue to make an issue out of it unless we do.
Yeah.
This is the chance for us to shift the burden of proof and say, we don't have we're not omniscient. We don't know, we don't have the resources to carry the burden of proof that says this proves our theory. But we can say, can we talk about why you're not looking at this? Can we talk about why you're not talking about this? So,
Well,
the loss of soil moisture, it's like Louise said, that there was the amount of, and I'm sorry if I'm taking up too much time on this. I didn't mean to monopolize the time. It's just it's monumental by any standards. What we're talking about is the loss of fresh water, and it's like Catherine told me in our interview the other day. There's so much loss that it changes It changes the rotation of the earth. It changes the, the tilt and the wobble of the earth because there's so much weight represented by the water that was in the soil and now it's somewhere else. But if when you lose fresh on land, fresh water is life. If you're talking about a monumental decline of fresh water, then you're talking about something that causes death to everything maybe it's death by 1,000 cuts, but it's land being deprived. It's all living things on land being deprived of what they need for life. But for through Soil Smart and Soil Wise, you all know how to fix this, and it's
Well,
not
I would
rocket
say it's
science. You know,
not really lost. It's similar when I hear people saying we're running out of water. Not running out of water. We have a
right?
management distribution quality
Yeah.
issue. It's not, we're not running out.
So
Right, because it's a closed site, it's a closed system, is your point, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
We're a
yeah,
water planet. We have got all the water we need. We
right.
just need to figure out how to keep what
And
we are given.
this article and its implications will be a major subject of the water and climate course.
Okay.
We'll have plenty of opportunities to talk about it.
Yeah.
Look forward to
It just the the absurdity is astounding. The absurdity of saying that this loss of soil moisture could be irreversible. That's just it leaves one in stunned silence. That's all.
Yeah. It just tells you how little we still really know about the planet we're living on.
We
Or
who
some people know.
we okay, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
They
Yes. All right.
they we,
I
I mean they.
they, yes. No. Thank you.
All right.
Okay,
So,
Travis.
so now sort of understanding a lot of the bigger picture, this was put together by OAEC, and it's sort of another illustration of the water cycle in that, what can we do thing. Uh, so here we've got bioswales that are recharging, infiltrating groundwater, gray water reuse system, rooftop rain tanks. There's rain gardens, and it's all going down into the creek there. Little Brock saying, "Slow it, spread it, sink it," which has been a mantra in my work for many years. But just here's another way to sort of reframe that water cycle picture in a more positive sense. And on the top right, we got the solar energy, the driver, the entire system. Um, so now we're going to go into more of the techniques. This is more basically, I guess, what I'm a little bit more comfortable with and what I've been doing for the last 15 years or so. So I'll talk about some rainwater harvesting, rooftop rainwater harvesting, atmospheric water harvesting, gray water reuse, different systems there, and then landscape water management techniques. But I think the most important technique is an attitude of gratitude. So a positive mental attitude when you're doing it. So rainwater harvesting, we got Taylor helping to fit a rainwater tank, and very basic. It's not so hard, very simple that we have for a rainwater system. We've got a catchment area, we've got a gutter, and then we've got some sort of tank where we're holding that water. And then not on this diagram is we generally have to have some way, we want to have some way to use it, right? So just tanking the water doesn't really do anything. We need to have some way to either bring it back inside to the built environment or use it in the for irrigation in the landscape. But yeah, so not so crazy complicated there. Some basic calculations. One thing that I hear from people all the time is that we don't get enough rain here to make rainwater harvesting useful or viable. And generally we start doing the math. And so for 1,000 square feet of catchment, which for people that aren't sort of aware of what 1,000 square feet would be like, that's a very, very modest residential home on the small side, maybe 1,500 feet. So for 1,000 square feet, 1 inch of rain, 623 gallons of water, 10 inches of rain, 6,230 gallons. And for where I live here in Nevada City, we get 59 inches of rain annually, and so 36,000 gallons of water. So looking at that number, those larger numbers, it really quickly becomes it's not so much a issue of the amount of catchment you have, it becomes an issue of the amount of storage you have, the amount that you can actually hold. And then the other piece, looking at the rainfall numbers for here, we're in a sort of classic Mediterranean climate where we have very dry summers, and our rain comes in the winter time. So we also want to be thinking, when do we get the rain and when do we want to be using it throughout the year? So a piece of that. So some sort of specifics on tanks. We won't go into too much detail. We're not talking about how to actually design these things, but just letting you all know that I like to have a settling layer on the bottom. So a silent J, so you're not having a waterfall come into the tank, so it's not churning all that up, but allows for any sediment in there to settle on the bottom. The outlet here is a float. Don't usually do that, but I would have the outlet a few inches above that lower bottom level, excuse me. And then also having the overflow on the tank. Always want to have an overflow, and that's going to be setting the level in your tank. The vent in there, we don't want any of this to pressurize at all, so it's going to be vented so that we have a nice flow of water throughout the entire system. First flush device is very simple. It's basically just a piece of pipe off a T connection, and that is a sort of a very basic sediment trap. The one on the right is quite large. It's got a little, that hose on the bottom is so that you can drain it. It'll go away. Some people like to put a ball in there. I've done both ways. Don't really think it's super necessary, but just a very, very simple device so that first rain event, you're going to have any dirty stuff on your roof is going to fall into this sediment trap, fill up, and then you have the clean water overflow into your tank. So we need gutters and downspouts. So on the left, we've got a very simple screen. So we've got the downspout. It's coming off the roof. This is underneath the woman's deck where we installed this. And it's just a sloped screen there. So any particulate stuff is going to slide off where the water will go right through. On the right, we've got a slightly better looking one with rain chains and a barrel with a screen on there that you can't really see, but it's doing a similar type of thing. In Rajasthan, they make everything a lot more beautiful than we do. So on the left, this is a downspout. So when it rains, the water shoots out of this creature's mouth. I don't know what it is. This is in the Jain temple in Jaisalmer. And then on the right, I just really loved how they would just very conscious of moving the water around and where they wanted to put it. So that's essentially a conveyance system there for the rainwater. Different types of tanks. On the right, you have sort of your plastic poly tanks, which are very common in this country. It's kind of your cheapest option generally for volume. They're quite easy to install. You just need to have a leveled pad underneath, and then you put it in place. On the left, we've got a corrugated tank. There's a few different styles of this. This one is being dropped onto a concrete pad with a crane. But there are other ones that you basically put in place and then you put a liner inside. But they're a lot more durable. You're less likely to have a puncture on the metal tank, and a lot of people just like the aesthetics of the metal tanks quite a bit more. Also for fire, these poly tanks on the right, they absolutely will pop in a fire. It's quite interesting. I've seen that post-fire, that a tank full of water heats up enough, the tank pops, and it actually puts out the fire around it. So you get this kind of incredible melted plastic thing, whereas these tanks on the right are a bit better for fire situations where you might be using that water for fire. So here's Chinese camp, elementary school. So we've got a roof and gutters there. You can see the pipe coming down off of the gutter on the roof. The pipe coming vertically is our first flush device. in the middle of that, we have a guillotine valve. So it's just a big valve that we pull out, and all the water can go through there. With these first flush devices, you sort of want to empty them once a year, once a season, so that they're ready to go when you have your first rain. And then this is the other side of that same tank. You can see again a first flush device coming down, and then in the box we have our pump. So that's how we're actually utilizing the water. And in this case, that water is being sent out to water their vegetable garden for the school. And on that tank is the tank level, which is a nice indicator so you know how much water is in there without having to look at the top. And the last thing we always try to do on installs is put in signage so people understand it. At Watershed Progressive, we're doing try to do installs at schools or other places that had sort of high visibility. So sort of a giant part of our motivation was education. So putting in a sign explaining what was going on was always part of the installation. So here's back to Rajasthan, and on the left, in the front of these houses, they actually integrated the design into the building of the house, and you would have your basically a cistern and have the house on top of it. So every single house is built with a large cistern underneath it. On the right, you have essentially a downspout, so that will shoot water off of that piece sticking out there. And then we have a very basic sediment trap on the ground there, and where that metal piece of metal is sitting, that's actually your tank access. So underneath that is the actual cistern. This is also in Rajasthan, and this is a courtyard, but it's also a rainwater catchment area. So this is graded so it flows back to that upper left corner. And as you would be walking on this, there are also these cultural values around keeping it clean and taking your shoes off and these sorts of things, tied into a lot of the cultural, religious values. But then there's also this public health component of keeping this area clean, because you're going to be actually drinking the water that falls here. I'd thought about this for a long time and then actually saw it in Colombia. I mean, this is, I call it a tank farm, but these tanks and then the roof structure over it, it was built purely for the purpose of harvesting rainwater. So this guy who I went and did, went and toured his place a few times. Yeah, it had actually built, I think, perhaps 5 of these around his property on the top of the ridge. And I guess we could debate whether it was a good or bad thing necessarily, but then he was selling this water down to the people that live below him. From a sort of ecological perspective, I think it's totally fine. I guess it's really more of a question of how much he was charging for the water, but at this point he's essentially his own water utility. But I thought this was quite cool to actually see that they were building structures purely for the purpose of harvesting rainwater. This is technically illegal under state code in California to build a structure for the purpose of harvesting rainwater, but you can build a structure for the purpose of shading your rain tanks with the secondary function of harvesting rainwater, which would basically look the exact same. So here's some poly tanks that we did. These are up on 2 different ranches. And back in Colombia, so they have the roof, and you've got the gutters underneath this tiled roof, and then just pipes suspended in air that are going back to the larger cistern to hold that water. So another way to do it. Here's a really cheap system that we put together at a buddy's place in Joshua Tree. This was all basically with materials that we had salvaged. Works pretty well. We daisy chained 6 of these 55-gallon barrels together, elevated a little bit so that we could gravity feed that to his garden, and a rain chain coming down with a screen. So this was, very cheap and kind of a fun weekend project to put it together. And here's a quick look at the installation of one of these metal tanks in Tucson. A lot more involved with the design as you're burying all your pipes and everything like that before you pour concrete on the pad, having the crane to actually drop that onto the wet concrete. And then we got Scott on this lower left image, and what he's doing is actually painting on a sealant to make sure that all the seams are sealed. And then on the right here, you can see there's a mesh gutter guard there, and then connecting the rest of the plumbing for the inflow into the tank. This is in Germany at a place called the Floating University, and I thought this was quite cool. Just again, sort of salvage materials. They've got all these funnels and pieces of plastic and IBC totes, and the rest of this thing is super wild and has bathtubs and old toilets and all kinds of things. But I guess just I really like the idea that you can, once you understand these very basic principles, you can capture water all sorts of different ways. So if you see the actual funnel there, what they did for a filter, which I thought was quite interesting, is they put charcoal in there. So that's just a big catchment piece, and then that water goes through that charcoal as a filtration piece. I guess my one major critique of this system and these IBC totes, they're great and they're quite cheap. But because they do allow light in, you do get algae growth in there quite easily. So, I mean, this system in California with our sort of sun and everything like that would be pretty gross fairly quickly. So keeping the tank opaque is definitely the way to go. And then just looking at the scalability of rainwater harvesting. So this was a system that we did for Cal Poly. And we basically ran their beef unit for their ag school. This is roughly 300,000 gallons of water being held here. And we captured it from the existing roofs of their beef unit at the top of the hill. And then this water gets pumped back up, and then that water is then used for all their cows. And they need quite a bit to drink, as well as sort of like washing, all these different sort of agricultural uses for this water. But again, just showing that these systems can go from kind of quite small to really as large as you need. And then again, on the scalability, I really like this picture. So every single roof in this picture is harvesting rainwater. So as a decentralized system, each one of these is an independent system. Each household is managing that on their own, but you are utilizing the majority of the city to capture and hold water. So just again, thinking that these systems are very scalable. So often overlooked is the ability to capture fog and pull moisture out of the air. So these are just some very, very simple fog nets. Super, super simple concept. You have this mesh and you have a gutter underneath, and then that is run into a tank. So thinking that it's not just rain, but we have all sorts of atmospheric moisture that we can take advantage of. Also overlooked, and something that we did quite a bit in Tucson, in places that are really hot, is collecting the condensate from an air conditioning unit. So we got some numbers here. These are from Brad Lancaster, but in a dry climate, you're talking 1/4 of a gallon per day on a home air conditioning unit, and a large unit doing 500 gallons per day. And in a humid climate, that goes up. So in a place like Tucson, it's very dry. Oftentimes you'll see on the side of a house where they just run this small 1/2-inch pipe from the roof, and then it just terminates. And then underneath it, you have all this green. It's like grass growing. It's like, well, what's that doing? It's like, well, that's just the condensate overflow that they never did anything with. So super easy. It's already there. All you have to do is sort of route it to where you'd like it to be. And this picture on the right is, a larger commercial unit that's purposely, they got some desert willows in there that are growing, doing pretty well. So just another way that we can be capturing water out of the air. This is a structure in China. So this is just, again, it's sort of very simple. It's just condensing water from that temperature differential on the inside of it, collecting that in a gutter, and then storing it. So this is totally passive. You build this thing, looks pretty solid. I don't have no idea how old this is, but then it's just working. There's no extra energy you're putting into this to harvest water from this.
Charles, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Do you know if that structure that you were showing, is that in a humid or dry climate?
I'm not sure exactly what the climate is. All I know about this specific structure is it in China, and that doesn't really say much because it's a giant country with a lot of different climates. So, yeah, sorry.
Send me the image. I'd like to investigate it. So, but
Yeah, happily, I
The
will.
grass is pretty green, so I don't know if that tells you at least the time of year, if not how humid it is. Hard to see what's behind it.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, we could. What I didn't include was sort of the cooling towers, which I know, Carl, you're very familiar with and can probably explain a huge amount far better than I can. In Iran, which is a very dry place, but they use that more for cooling, and also the Qanat system there. But again, tried to tried to limit the number of slides for this. So, all right. So talking about gray water. So what is gray water? Gray water is lightly used water generated from sinks, showers, and laundry. What it is not, we're not talking about black water, which is our toilet water, or kitchen sink water. And on the left here, I included this picture. So this is where I like to stay when I'm in Colombia. This is my friend Yup built this all by hand, and everything in here is gravity fed. He's a stickler for design and doesn't like using any extra energy at all. So everything in here from the fresh water coming into the system, the gray water going out of the system, and then the toilet goes down to like a biofiltration or constructed wetland essentially is all done by gravity, which is quite cool. And different types of gray water systems, laundry to landscape system, which is cheap, simple, it's easy DIY. Branch drain system, which is kind of a gravity fed system where you've got a whole bunch of different pipes, gravity feeding into the landscape. That's specific to the site. So you need to have the right topography there. Sometimes it's not possible depending on the location of the house and the landscape. And then we do have can do pump and filter systems, which are far more complex. People like to jump right to this one. It is totally possible. It requires a lot of maintenance, having maintained some of these. It's really disgusting. But then a benefit is you can make them super whiz bang, automate them with solenoids and app controlled stuff, all that sort of thing. So required in California on code is you have to have a way to divert your gray water. So we've got sort of three very common ways to do it. I like this top one where you just have two different pipes and behind your washing machine, and you just move your drain hose on your washing machine from one to the other as necessary. The bottom left image is a Jandy valve which you get at sort of like a pool supply store, and it's just a large 2-inch three-way valve. And that's, so that we try and locate that under the sink or somewhere that's accessible. And you can then move that from the landscape to your sewer or septic as necessary. And then on the left, we have a brass three-way valve, which is generally what we'll put onto a laundry system. But again, in California, this is a code requirement, so that if you are doing a load of laundry with bleach or something like that you don't want to put out into the landscape, then you can make that change. The other thing that they talk about, if say it's really wet in the wintertime and your basin is already fully saturated, then this way you can easily change that so it's going to be going into your sewer or your septic instead. On the end of the system, you need to have some sort of point where you're discharging that gray water. On the right side, this is what you'll see in a lot of the books on gray water systems. This is basically a irrigation round. And so you're creating this cavity. It's open on the bottom, and then that water can infiltrate. I don't particularly like these anymore. They use a lot of plastic, and you have to sort of cut them up and stuff like that. And they don't really work as well as I would like. So I came up with the thing on the left, which I call an Oso vault, and it's basically just a milk crate wrapped in filter fabric, landscaping fabric. So that way that water can actually go out all directions. It's open on the bottom, but it can also come out the sides. So I've had these installed about 6 years and then dug them up and had no root in them at all. So they work pretty well. And then in the center, we've got a barrel vault. So that's a 55-gallon drum. That's cut in half, so it's open on the bottom. So again, we're just creating a cavity so that the water can infiltrate into there. Mulch is an integral part of these systems. So discharging into this mulch basin is very important. So the mulch is actually what's giving a habitat for all the microbiology to live in there, and you get the biofiltration components. So at Rush Creek Lodge, it's a 4-star hotel, and we really didn't have any control over what people are putting down the drain, realizing there are people coming from all around the world. And there is a sign next to the sink saying this is gray water. But yeah, we sort of expect there's probably people that are using, acetone, like nail polish remover or that sort of thing, putting it down. We found that we had less loss of trees that were on gray water than were on potable irrigation by a significant amount. So this mulch has an incredible capacity to just have the correct microbiology. And there's far more buffering capacity in that than I had thought at first, in sort of, what a lot of the code is written to, in my opinion. So mulch, having that in place is really ideal. Not just ideal, but a mandatory part of it. This is sort of the ideal mulch that I would use if possible. This isn't always available. So at Rush Creek Lodge, we're at 6,000 feet in the Sierras. We had made a deal with a lumber yard across the way, and they were bringing us transfer trucks of this sort of mulch. We put this down over about 20 acres, about 3 feet deep. It came down to about a foot in that first season, so it broke down a huge amount, enormous amounts of mycelial matting underneath there, and soil builds from the top down. So putting that on top of just literally granite substrate, we had to excavate the pool deck around 60 feet down. This actually built soil incredibly fast, and some of the best soil you could imagine. If you don't have wood chips, so working in South America, it's quite different. So you don't have the same amount of arborists, or if you're in the desert, something like that, whatever organic material is available. So use whatever you got, but really thinking like some sort of organic material that's going to hold that microbiology and be able to break down that water, or not break down the water, but break down the nasty stuff in the gray water. Plant selection. It's hard to take pictures of gray water systems because when they're finished, you shouldn't really see them. So on the right, we've got a nice garden. This is all fed on gray water. This is about, I think, 6 different discharge points in here. So this garden has, I don't think, any supplemental irrigation on it. You can actually, as I'm looking at it, you can see one of the irrigation rounds sort of in the center there, sort of the green cap. But choose perennials that they like a lot of water, thinking that they're going to be getting quite a bit of water. Riparian species that like wet feet are great. You can absolutely do food producing plants, but you want to do something, you're not in contact with the gray water. So something that's giving fruit or something like that. And then definitely want to think about that plants love gray water, and they're going to grow really, really quickly. So you want to be thinking about that when you place a tree, and think about, future growth, and make sure it's not too close to a house or that sort of thing. Different products. So now it's pretty easy to just go to the store in the United States and get products that are labeled gray water safe. The main things that you're going to be looking for in a gray water safe product is really the sodium is one of the main ones. But these are sort of the things we're not trying to put this other stuff down into the basin. As I said, at Rush Creek, we did find that the mulch has an incredible buffering capacity. So some small amount of these things is going to be totally fine. But if you're really dosing your system, at some point, it's going to have an impact on that biology, right? So, but anyway, very easy in the United States to get soaps that are, just labeled as gray water safe. So here's a diagram for a basic laundry landscape system. We got the washing machine, you've got the drain hose, and then we got that three-way diverter. So on one side, it's getting routed out into the sewer or the septic, and the other way, it's going through the wall. Got a vent stack there, so it's venting, it's not pressurizing, and then you're just running that out into the landscape. We're splitting that into as many different basins and discharge points as we need, and then having that planted out with vegetation is also important. Here's a picture of a gray water system going in. This is a sort of a community gray water build, so it's a nice way to get all your neighbors out and do some digging, plant some trees. And now let's talk about branch drain systems, which are quite simple. All we're really doing from a branch drain is we're running that water gravity fed out into the landscape. So we're using what plumbers would call a double L fixture. Generally, plumbers would run that, so they're running two pipes, the water from two pipes into one pipe, and we're sort of running it backwards, if you will. So we're taking one and then splitting it. When we're putting in these double L's, we want to level them, make sure that we're getting the split to be as close to 50-50 as possible. You can also adjust that if you want it more one side or the other, but that's generally what we're doing there at the splitter, is getting that level, and then on the actual pipe, we want a minimum of a 2% grade on that pipe to get the water to flow through there. And you can also see on this diagram, before these double L's, there's a clean out. That's a nice thing. You can just throw a hose in there. So the splitter is going to be where you're going to have a potential clog situation. So having a clean out before that is better. So here we got this is in Tucson. So again, we got these just nice two standpipes up at the top left, so you can move your hose in between the two of them. And then top right, we're looking, this is the stub out where we're actually coming out into the landscape. And you can see you've got a double L there, and then we're running those lines out into where we've got our mulch basins and the discharge points. So these two folks on the bottom left, there it looks like they're checking the level on that pipe to make sure you got at least a 2% grade and getting your flow splits level, and then making sure that we're planting. So looks like it's possibly a mesquite going in there. But yeah, planting native vegetation that's going to thrive on that gray water is an important part of the system. So here's a residential system in Glen Ellen. Doesn't look like too much, but here we got pipe coming out, flow splits, and then that's what it looked like 2 years later. This is taken in August, I believe. So you could notice the difference in the heat, I guess, just around this vegetation. But yeah, like I said, it's kind of hard to take pictures of gray water systems because if you do them right, you shouldn't really see them. But so this is just running that water passively from the house, all the sinks, showers, everything other than the toilet and kitchen sink is being discharged into the landscape here. This is Rush Creek Hotel. We got a couple more pictures of pipes. Super exciting. Pipes. Got the flow splits there and more. So this is sort of getting into the scalability. This system was doing reuses around 3 million gallons annually. So it looks a bit like a war zone at this point. But then this is actually the same spot. So this is roughly 2 years, I can't remember, what was it? 5 years later. So I took this picture from standing on that balcony. Couldn't get up on the balcony, unfortunately, because they were people living in there at that point. But you can see that these plants. These trees are doing super well, zero supplemental irrigation here, and just, thriving. So again, so this is August 2017, looking down the hill, got all our pipes in place, got the trees laid out, ready to go in. In this case, we're using mostly aspens and big leaf maples, and then that's the same place. That's 5 years later, and those are the trees that we planted. So again, sort of hard to take these pictures and actually see anything because it just looks like a jungle if you do it right. So the pump and filter system, here's an example of that, what it kind of looks like, where you have on the far left here, gray water that's coming into this box. On the top, we have makeup water, and then the gray water going out to the landscape. The makeup water is so that when the homeowner went on vacation and they weren't actually going to be creating the gray water, all their irrigation, we ran all the irrigation off of this box. So he could set his app to vacation mode, and then it was dumping fresh water into the box and then running it out in that same system. So we had solenoids and a Ratio Wi-Fi controller in there, so he could control that all from his phone. And this is what's happening in that box. So we've got various different filters. So we've got like a more coarse filter on the left side, and they get finer as we go to the right. Filtering that before it gets to the pump is really important. Another consideration with these kind of systems, you definitely don't want to have any sort of cross connection. That's where public health officials will be very, very upset with you. So that means that you have to be isolating that gray water from the fresh water supply. The easiest way to do this is an air gap or a black backflow preventer. And like I said earlier, these require quite a bit of maintenance. So these filters, they're holding all this hair and all the gunk that goes down the sink, basically, of which there is a lot. And that gets all held up in these filter mats. And so you have to periodically pull them out and spray them out, clean them out, and put them back in, which is super gross. On a branch drain system, we're running 2-inch pipe, and the idea is that we have enough volume in that pipe that all that gunk just ends up in the mulch basin, and all that hair and all that kind of stuff, it's actually just extra nutrients for the plants. So I guess that's the main reason that I don't like these systems, is that they have a significant amount more maintenance, and it's not fun maintenance either, even if you're getting paid on a maintenance contract to do it. But yeah. Okay, so now talk about sort of landscape water management techniques, and first talk about beavers, right? So the engineers of North America, we got the beaver flag up on the top left here. And Brock likes to say we had the bear flag revolt, now we're having the beaver flag revolt. So, but so beavers, they're just like these little hard workers, and anytime they hear flowing water, they're going to go to it and try and stop it, right? So this is Lundy Canyon, one of my favorite places in the Sierras. This is up in Old, one of the most biodiverse canyons in all of the Sierras. And then just, it's an incredible spot to see these stepped beaver dams all the way up this giant canyon. So this is out in Merced, and this is in a more of like a drainage ditch. I spoke to the guy that was constantly trying to destroy this thing and then having the beavers rebuild it overnight. So this is in a much more urban or suburban type area. But this is sort of why ranchers don't like beavers, right? Is because they are these hard workers, and oftentimes they'll flood areas that they don't want to be flooded. Brock and OEC, they have a great handbook on different techniques so that we can live with beavers and sort of like have a culvert. If you think about that being a point flow of water, that's ideal for a beaver. That's just like, I cannot stop. I have to stop that, but for the rancher, they're like, well, I really want that culvert to flow. So, that my so that my road doesn't get blown out or that sort of thing. So yeah, Brock has a whole handbook on different techniques for sort of fencing out culverts and that sort of thing, so that we can absolutely live with beaver, and sort of utilize their hard work. But this is out in Nevada. It's Susie Creek. So this is after beavers came back into the landscape. So you're seeing from 91 to 2013. And you can just see, what the difference is happening, right? So as they just creating more and more dams, they're flooding a larger and larger area with these sort of knock-on benefits, right? We're really thinking that this is the foundation of what allowed for all the willows to come in, that allowed a lot of our large herbivores to eat that, and all of it. So it's really this foundational piece of the North American ecology. And not understanding that, Europeans came here and just started taking out the beavers, right? And it's had a very detrimental impact. But thankfully, like understanding that, we can go back in and do them. So this is also a nice image around fire. So this is up in Oregon, and you can just see that this fire came through here, and this area that the beavers had hydrated, it just didn't burn the same, right? So another benefit that we realized, that hydrated fuels don't burn the same as dry tinder does. But when we don't have beavers on the land, we can go in and do the work ourselves. So this was a project I was involved with on Mountain Maidu land. This is up near Mount Lassen, and we're meadow restoration. So we were taking these small incised channels going through the meadow and essentially creating our version of a beaver dam. So cutting down a whole bunch of pine limbs, and then we put that into a kind of lasagna with thick layers of mud and then more pine needles, stuff like that. And it's really satisfying, super fun work. You get sort of instant gratification. I mean, this was taken the same day as we built this, and you can see that it's backing up. So it's very satisfying to be able to take that channelized flow and then start to flood larger areas. So again, this is from OAEC, stormwater problem or solution. Pave it, pipe it, pollute it, or slow it, spread it, sink it. So this is Brad Lancaster's house in Tucson on the right side of these images. I believe this is about 15 years apart. And then basically, if you don't know Brad's story, this is his house. Him and his brother decided, when they saw that the street was flooding and there was all this water running down the street in front of their house, they're like, all right, we're going to go out, and they cut the curb pre-legally, and started channeling that water into the public easement there and planting trees. So this lower picture is the same exact location. You can't even see the house, right? And you have all this really, really lush vegetation that's grown in. The impact on the heat is very, very tangible. So going to this place, it's like, which house would you rather live at? The place that's as shaded by trees and all this sort of thing, or the place that's the barren lot? And it is an absolute no-brainer, especially somewhere like Tucson that's incredibly hot. So yeah, on the left, we just have a simple little diagram showing what's going on. Or if you have these sort of raised tree plantings, it's not getting any water, versus if we can create that depression and cut that curve to allow that water to go in there, put mulch in there, plant them out, that sort of thing, can have this incredible effect. Here's some more images of green infrastructure. So top left is Tucson. That was actually a WMG one. The bottom two were just, I saw them out and about, and I'm the guy who takes pictures of curb cuts when I see them. So this is a really simple one in Lagunitas in the brewery parking lot, and they didn't really even cut the curb. They just kind of left a gap there. And then this one in Sausalito, where they had that planted out, more with like stormwater management system. But Yeah, so now you know what you're looking for. You might see these out and about. I think this is sort of lost. Most people just walk right past this and don't realize what's going on. But thinking that if you have a road or a parking lot, you have this incredible permeable catchment essentially, and it's generally graded in a certain direction. The civil engineers will do that on purpose, right, to get the water off, and then it's just one more step to make use of it. So I think the original kind of green infrastructure might have been, I don't know if it was India, but definitely they've been doing these kind of techniques for a long time. So this is Bada in Rajasthan, which means the big garden. And essentially what you have here is a massive check dam. So this is a impermeable dam, quite large, as you can see. And on this right side, when they get the one monsoon event a year, this will back up behind and create a big lake. And then as that water infiltrates, and definitely some is evaporating, as that lake grows smaller into the season, they're actually planting into it, right, with different crops, realizing the stuff the farthest out is going to be the most dry. Anyway, so they have a whole rotation of crops that they're planting into that lake, into that talab as it recedes. So here's another look. You can just see the amount of vegetation they have there, and then they put temples and incredible things on top of it as well. And then looking out, so this whole area floods, and then it's planted as those floodwaters are receding. And then this is on the downstream side of it, where you have essentially an orchard. These are a variety, like mostly mangoes in here, with some huge, huge trees. And then the other thing that they're doing there is they have wells. So they're actually pulling up that groundwater that they're sinking from the other side, and then, being able to store it in the ground and then pull it up. So when I was there, it had quite a few of these sort of tractors and water tanks going in. They've got diesel pumps now. This system previously, this was probably built to be run by a oxen that would be drawing up water from here, the lifting method, and then it's been retrofitted with a diesel pump much more recently. And now we have, you know, uh, fossil fuel powered tractors to haul these tanks away, but they were still had camels and other ways that they would be moving water. So this was extracted from, a well in similar fashion, and then trucked over by camel to the village where it would be needed. So this is Jaisalmer. This is Jaisalmer Fort. And what we're looking at here, I mean, there's obviously a large fortress, sort of castle structure in the background, but in the front, this is actually out into the catchment. So this is in far west, Jaisalmer, roughly 15 miles or so from Pakistan, from the border in the Thar Desert. So a very, very dry place. And the only way that they could have this castle, fortress, and city there was by having this talab, which is like a lake. And so it channels down to this point. And when we're out on this catchment was roughly 1,000 square kilometers that then channeled all the stormwater. At this point, you're getting the tail end of the monsoon. So the monsoon starting in the Bay of Bengal, and then this is in the far west. So it's dropped all its water essentially, and they're getting just the absolute tail end of that in Rajasthan. So you're getting one or maybe two rain events a year that you're living off of. And then that 1,000 square kilometers, it's also very torrential. So you're talking like quite a lot of water coming at one time, and it channels down to this lake essentially. And this lake was how they were able to have water to have a city there. So out on that catchment, 1,000 square kilometers, when you're standing in it, it's hard to see that you're even, the scale of that watershed. But they were able to understand and engineer these walls all through it to slow down the velocity and move that water where it wanted to be, right? Thinking that those monsoon events are very torrential. So they did this roughly 1,000 years ago. These systems about a
I
thousand
actually
years
think
old.
6,000 years ago. Just to,
Well, they've been doing it for long. I think this
the-
specific system is 1,000 years
well,
old.
this I have a picture of a 6,000-year-old city site that has a feature very much like this. So anyway, but
Yeah,
those.
so I didn't have an image, or I didn't include it, but they have these posts they call Gordons, and it actually has the maintenance records on them carved in Sanskrit, because
Oh,
thinking like the maintenance is it's like generations, right? So anyway, super fascinating to me. I love this sort of thing. I could do a whole presentation just on the Rajasthani stuff. But anyway, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is about 1,000 years old, because I don't think the Jaisalmer fort was too much older than that. But anyways, and you're out in Rajasthan, it just there's water bodies all over the place. So it's like I said, one of the most arid deserts in the world, but they have the highest population density of any desert with a comparable rainfall by having all these different lakes, by managing the water on the landscape all over the place. Some of them look kind of gross, but it's good enough for goats and sheep. And if you got no water, this is quite a big deal. Um, so here's some images. Just this is out much closer to here some years ago. We just got some sort of infiltration swales and then doing some sheet mulch over the top. So moving water on the landscape and doing our best to infiltrate and hold it. We had a huge amount of invasive star thistle in this area that we sheet mulched, inoculated, and were able to eradicate fairly easily, actually. When most people go to chemicals and manual removal, which is literally painful and a lot of work. Instead, we were able to just knock it down and change the soil conditions, infiltrate a lot more water, and improve the soil. So here are some swales on contour before planting. This is going to be an orchard situation. This is kind of classic permaculture type technique, right? So having these on contour so that they can hold and infiltrate water. And then these are going to be planted out with fruit trees after. This is in Tuolumne County, I believe. Here's these are some olives. This is about 10 years time. No supplemental irrigation, but I just like the image. You can actually see the water in the system there. And there's a pond before it rained. We just finished it up higher on the landscape. Um, and then back to Rush Creek. This is a more elaborate pond with various recirculation components, mostly done for the aesthetic components rather than the sort of ecological benefits. But this is a manufactured dug pond on the landscape. And so here we have a rock check dam that we put into a gully, right? So the idea of these sort of structures would be to slow down the water. As you can see, there's a lot of sediment backed up behind it. And I thought it was quite interesting because this was only about 2 or 3 weeks after we had built this structure. And the a rain event, we got hit by an atmospheric river, and this is actually the atmospheric river. Like, so what we're looking at here is um, the pond, as Pete equals pond on the right side. That's the dam wall completely overflowing. So the overflow was completely overwhelmed by this rain event and just completely topped the dam, which held in place only because I'm pretty sure that it had willows planted in it and other plants that were stabilizing that structure. But anyway, pretty dramatic picture. But that was what backed up behind this from this rain event here. And then I think this is kind of like the final case study. This is back in Colombia. This is Barichara. Um, just you can see the town, incredibly beautiful spot with the adobe. We can go into that in more detail. I think we have talked about that, Carl. But here's what the the old growth, it's a tropical dry forest, looks more like this. There's less than 10% of the original tropical dry forest left. And then this is the site that we were working with, one of them. This is Orion del Agua. So this is, before we'd started work. So it used to be something closer to this. And it was deforested and cut down fairly recently for tobacco. And then they realized it wasn't terribly good area for growing tobacco, and they just stuffed it all up. So here we have a lot of exposed soil. We've lost most of our big trees. Got some pretty defined erosion going on. But here we are. We have, in 3 years' time, here's Sebastian, planted the first tree there, came back 3 years later, and that's the growth that we'd had on that. It's a very satisfying place to work because it is the tropics, so things grow incredibly fast. But here's sort of how we did it. Here's Alpha, and we have a really simple rock check dam here, just a little rock structure built roughly on contour. And then on the left side, you can see that it's backed up with a good amount of sediment on that left side, including organic material, and has self-seeded itself. So all of that vegetation growing in there, we hadn't planted any of that, but we're essentially creating little terraces. So going through the landscape, here's Oswaldo. You can kind of see, looking down, these rocks were actually placed in there when we're looking for these little erosion gullies and rills, and then filling them in as best as possible. Here are a couple more examples. So really simple structures. See the top left, small little channelized flow. We're able to put some rocks placed in there, and then slowed down that water, backed up the sediment, and then just started to self-seed. So yeah, we built, I don't know, probably thousands of these all over the landscape. We were doing this with children, so that's why some of these look like they might have been built by children, because they were. But yeah, so here's some of the impact that we've had. So we're going, roughly 2 years time, and this is the impact that we've had as far as the amount of vegetation that's come back in. So some of the techniques that we're using on the planting, very quickly, sort of adapted syntropic agroforestry techniques. So Ernest Grolsch out of Brazil, I believe he's Austrian guy, developed this in Brazil. But we're thinking about forest succession, basically, and planting all of that at once. So also using cactus, which I'd never used before, but placing those on contour. So that's actually helping to slow down the water as well. Organic material. And then, like I said, we're planting for that full forest succession all at once. So thinking that we want those like cebas and all these kind of trees that are going to be our climax forest, they're going in there as well. And then there are other things that are going to be growing faster, and they're going to be shading and help creating that environment. Some of those are going to be chopped down and just used for biomass. Jess was a little annoyed that I used this slide because she thinks it doesn't have enough organic material. So you should know that if we would want to be putting down a lot more organic material than is shown in this picture. But this is the basic technique that we're using. And then here's kind of what it looks like as it matures. So it's maybe a little hard to see, but there was actually a little rock wall built there to slow it down. And then we have this diverse array of plantings. So we've got this mulch layer in there. Some of that is just naturally come into place. Some of it we've put in there. And then we've got all these different plants coming up. So starting to grow the forest. And we got a large part of this project was also engaging the community. So here's Felipe Medina. We did a whole water cycle education with one of the local schools, which was quite fun, really cool. Here's some kids. We made a rainfall simulator, so showing all the different amounts, what happens when you pour water on different sorts of substrates, essentially. So what happens if you have, really good soil versus not good soil? You get that nice feedback there. And then finally, the larger sort of components here, so we can see where Orient del Agua is, the town of Barichara. There was a picture earlier, and you can kind of see that whole area to the right. That's the areas that was deforested. This area to the left that is like nice and green is cloud forest. So when you're in Barichara, you're looking across the Rio Suarez, and you can actually see these clouds coming over towards you, and then they hit this hot, dry air, and they go up, right? So if we could get enough vegetation on this, make this brown area green, and cool it down, then we should be able to bring back and sort of stabilize those rain patterns. It's engaging with the whole community here. It's a multi-stakeholder effort. Obviously, this is a whole patchwork of private property. So it's an exciting project because the people there, these waterfalls they've had have dried up in recent memory. So talking in the last 10, 15 years. So it's sort of like where there used to be rivers and where there used to be swimming holes that they used to go to. They're kids. It's just a dry creek bed now. So when we can try and explain and demonstrate these techniques, the local campesinos are very excited to engage with this and would love to, fix this and turn these waterfalls back on. So then here's some quick numbers. Since 2021, roughly 3,000 trees planted, 52 different species, 11 different native bees observed, 9 orchid species. There's 1 possible new species of vanilla orchid. Super exciting. Over 110 volunteers and over 30 students engaged. And that's what I've got. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles. Very good. So thank you, Charles. That was really lovely. Lovely. Thanks, JP. Round of applause indeed. Yay. So yes,
Yeah,
catching water,
up.
we can do it.
Totally. There are any questions or anything?
Yeah,
Happy to
anybody have
stay
any
on
questions?
chat.
Well, there's someone that's such great information. If I can, I'd like to share a picture of a building that I designed that has that big water spout
Oh,
to celebrate water.
okay, you can share. Oh, there it is.
So this cantilever's out from the wall 5 feet, so it's quite dramatic in the spirit of the water spouts that you shared with us.
So they're still getting rain there.
Yes.
JP.
I don't see it.
Hey.
Sorry.
So yes, on the catching waterfront, I think I'm awake enough to come on camera now. Yes. Hi everyone. So I want to share a story first on the catchment front and ask a related question. I lived in Indonesia for quite a while, and it rains, of course, a lot in the tropics. And I was just incredibly puzzled why there was no catchment. Like nobody was doing it because there's a very dry period as well. And I found out that culturally, it is looked down upon. It is looked down upon as a sign of a lack of prosperity. You're basically advertising that you're poor if you have catchment. So it used to be very common, and now it's not. And with the advent of tourism just sucking all the water out of the aquifers in Bali, it's becoming dire. So, and yet this resistance is cultural. So I wanted to bring that story up, and Charles, you brought up that the resistance in Western society is regulatory, basically,
Yeah.
right? So my question is like, how do we make catchment catchy?
Well, I guess just I learned today that actually in Belgium and some other countries in Europe, it's required actually. So it's again that it's like that regulatory piece where it's not an option. You have to have rainwater catchment, and it has to be. It's like you have to be washing your clothes with rainwater, right? And
Oh,
this is coming from the
that's
UK, where he was saying, "Oh, the solution is not to like get individual people to do it, but to just legislate that you have to do it."
so
So
Charles, that they legislate that you have to use captured water for laundry and
yeah, yeah, and it's a requirement not just to capture that water, but then I was saying like the use piece, it's like doesn't do anything if you just hold the water in a tank, but it's like it all has to be tied back into the home, and so you're using these non-potable, you know, but it's required. It's absolutely it's not an option.
Mm.
So if you're just, Joe Blow homeowner, it's like that's what you do, you know.
they must have some sort of filter to cleanse the water to use in laundry.
Yeah, I mean, you can just do there's a couple of different ways you can do that. You talk about this in more detail if you want, Carl, but there's a what is it called? Aqua Loop. It's actually like a company I consulted with to get a fancy unit for doing that exactly that. It's like an automated unit, and I'm sure they've made a lot of sales, but they didn't do super well here because they didn't have the same market.
Yeah.
Um,
I
So
have,
create markets is the answer, right?
I have a question, Charles. I'm just wondering, because all of this water captured in big tubs, uh, and so it's not going into the soil. So is there uh, a benefit or a negative benefit of doing that? I mean, one of the lovely stories that I have heard about, especially around permaculture and stuff, is that when you capture the water in the ground, then you get springs back. So if you put it in
mhm.
the tanks, do you get the springs back too? Is there still enough water to do that, or does that really sort of eliminate that possibility or reduce it?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think the first thing is that the amount of water that's being stored in the tank is a fraction of the total water.
Yeah,
And then the way that I like to think about it is it's really an artificial glacier. So you're holding and using that water on site again. You're not taking that somewhere else. You're not shipping it away. It's staying in the same watershed, but it's just being used. I mean, generally, for if it's used for irrigation, it's something that's like, oh, well, you're putting that back into the ground, but later in the season,
right.
right? And then if you're using it for something else, what's offsetting that water, that wherever you're getting your water from, right? So that's a specific thing where you're at. But your biggest storage is absolutely the soil. So the amount that you're capturing off of a catchment, uh, you know, it's a fraction of that total, and your storage is quite small. Um, so yeah, I guess that's how I would answer that. I think it's important to think that and it's part of the code as well here in California that it has to be used on site. So we're not talking about like bottled water. One of the big problems is
Right.
not so much the bottling, but then you're shipping it out from where it was. You're moving it somewhere far away. That's definitely has huge uh negative components to it. So
Yeah, it's killed the Colorado.
Mm.
Well, thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it. We're have run quite a bit over time, but it was certainly worth it. So I'm gonna share for a very brief minute a little bit more about uh, Soil Smart. If I can find the share button, which they moved. Oh, geez. So we are a volunteer organization, and there are ways to support volunteer organizations, and this is one of them. These are 3 ways, actually. So if you are so moved, we would really appreciate it. We collect money to help plant forests. We're doing the Milwaukee forest planting method, and you'll hear more about that as time goes on. And we're also raising money for people to train 3 people, 2 in soil science and 1 in soil hydrology. So giving careers to 3 people locally and bringing some really rich understanding into specifically the Spokane area, because we don't have many people here. We did have one of the attendees here today, Matt Moser, is a soil hydrologist and a mineral person, and has been working with Zach Weiss, and his wife has been trained by Elaine Ingram. So those were magical finds for me, but we want to have more of those people. So you can help through donations, and then you can just support our general work by the QR code in the middle, which gives us the money to do these kinds of things. So we really would appreciate that. And you can become a member, which is another way. I was sort of surprised to discover that we have almost 200 people who have become members of Soil Smart. So we will be really trying to generate more energy and interest and collaboration and that kind of stuff with these folks, because there are things we can do together. And there's quite a few of us. So maybe there's just something magical that will happen with those connections. So that's what membership offers. So thanks very much for